Hey guys, welcome to System Breakdowns, and today I'm excited to go over another Trevor Wittman fighter, and we're going to be talking today about Kamaru Usman. I'll be honest, this is a fighter that I think is the least understood fighter of most of the UFC fighters, and I think it's because, so MMA is very broad, and there's a lot of areas that you have to understand, and unfortunately, the guys who fight well against the cage are some of the least understood fighters, and when fighters do that a lot, they tend to get labeled as boring. And I think the reason for that is people don't really understand what's happening against the cage. And there's some really, really interesting dynamics that Kamaru Usman is probably the best at this, of his tactics and wrestling and fighting off of the cage. And so, because people don't really understand what he's doing from there, he does get, I think, often mislabeled as boring. But honestly, I think he's an extremely interesting fighter, and his tactics are brilliant. I mean, he's very, very good. There's a reason that he consistently wins. And it's because he's better in an area than anybody else. And I think when you talk about cage fighting, it's something that, people talk a lot about, like the importance of calf kicks, for example. Like, this is the big trend. I think there's been a big trend in MMA over the last 5-10 years that people are not talking about, and that is the superiority of the cage itself. And the guys who are the best at it are your John Jones, Stipe Miocic, Kamaru Usman. You noticing some trends here? GOATs, right? Guys who, for some reason, can never get beaten, and it's because they dominate an area where other people just don't understand it. And all three of them use a very similar tactic where they put up a guy up against the wall, and then they grind him out. And there's a lot of advantages to this, both in the ability to wear somebody out, as well as some tactical advantages as well. And so I think this makes for a very interesting case study. What I think is really important to notate on this, and I want to get started in a second, but Kamaru Usman, and one of the things I really like about Trevor Wittman is he's very good at this, is his fighters all have a very, very specific game plan. And Kamaru Usman is a very good example of that. If you look at his fights, he follows the exact same strategy, the exact same game plan, because it's all built around a very clear-cut system. So when you talk about systems, he's a very good case study in talking about how you can build a system to your strengths. So that being said, I'm going to break this down into a couple different parts. I'm going to break this down into striking and takedowns, and then I'm going to talk about standing from the wall, kneeling from the wall, and then on the ground at the wall, because these are three separate things that he dominates all three of these areas, but we'll talk about that as we get into it. So that being said, let's get started with striking. Okay guys, so let's talk about striking for Kamaru Usman. Really, I should say striking and takedowns, but keep in mind, the thought process for him through this whole fight is always about putting them up against the cage. That's always his job number one, is try to get them back to the cage whenever possible. And there's a lot of things built into his game that are designed with that objective in mind, and we're going to talk about all that. First of all, early on in the fight, he's going to do a lot of pace control. This is a very important aspect of his fight. You hear Trevor Wittman talk about it when he fights. In fact, when he fought Jorge Masvidal, he mentions it on the ring corner that, look, let him explode in a couple of big explosive movements and try to get out. And then after he gets tired from these explosive movements, then turn up the pace. And this is kind of the trend. Early on in the fight, he goes very low tempo. He tries to reduce and try to bring everything down a little bit. And as the fight goes on, and you'll see in second, third, fourth, fifth rounds, you start seeing that tempo increase for him, and he starts getting more aggressive on his pacing throughout the entire fight. But early on in the fight, it's a much slower pace, and he does that deliberately. Now, as far as entries, there's a couple things that are really important for him when it comes to entering range, because what he wants to do is enter range and back them up. Enter range and back them up. He doesn't want to play this game where I attack and then I move back and then it's my turn, your turn. He's not trying to do that. What he's trying to do is just slowly walk you backward. He's going to do a lot of cutting off the cage. It's very important for him to maintain that ability to keep you backed up. He can never let you regain that. The guys who have done that, like Demian Maia, it's much harder for him to work his game against guys who are successful at that. Colby Covington's probably the best example of a guy he had a very hard time backing up and a very hard time cutting off the ring, because Colby is too experienced at that. He knew it was coming, so he started anticipating that. And as a result, I think he had the hardest time with Colby compared to any other fighter. So what he's going to do is this. From the outside, the first thing you're going to notice is a couple things. First of all, very, very active at feinting, particularly level changes. He threatens the level change a lot, which I find interesting because he usually does not shoot from the inside of the ring. He waits till he backs them up first, but he wants to make them afraid of the shot. However, If he has a hard time in exchanges or he feels like he's not doing well, that is when you'll see him take reactive shots. We'll talk about that in a minute. But generally speaking, from the outside, he's going to use a lot of active feinting and particularly the level change to threaten so that they never get too comfortable in their striking. This is a tactic that George St. Pierre used really well, where a lot of guys were afraid to strike really aggressively with him because they knew at any point they can get taken down. And this is one of his big threats, and that's why I mentioned the reactive shot, is because one of his big threats is that reactive shot. If they start coming in and pressing too hard, they're afraid of getting taken down, and with good reason, because his takedowns are amazing, right? And particularly his reactive shot. So that fear and that threat keeps guys at bay a little bit. And like I said, it's about pacing. He wants to keep them from doing a lot of damage to him, so he's going to reduce the pace. And one of the ways he's going to do that is by presenting a threat that they have to deal with. If they don't deal with this, he can, of course, follow through with the takedown, and he has done it. But mostly what he wants is to get them to back off. And from here, what he's going to do is this. He's going to, from the outside, he's going to use what I call the Trevor Wittman step. This is a thing that Trevor Wittman, he does YouTube tutorials on. He talks about it all the time. All of his fighters do it. Justin Gaethje does it. Kamaru Usman do it. All of his fighters do this, and it's a very effective tactic that what he's going to do is from the outside to cover distance, this back foot is going to come in, and he's going to explode forward with the jab. It's a range-covering jab that he will use frequently. So instead of doing like, when you see GSP do a jab from a distance, it's this kind of sliding motion where I'm in and I'm out. In the case of Trevor Wittman fighters, what they do is instead of doing this like long lunge or something like that where it's more like fencing or sliding it with both feet where you're jumping, what he has them do is bring the back foot in and propel themselves forward. You will see Usman do this a lot, where from the outside, pop, pop. That type of footwork is very, very instrumental to him because he wants to be able to enter quickly. He doesn't want to sit out here and slowly enter and get banged up. He wants to enter the range where he can hit takedowns, where he can drive them back, and where he can be successful. Now, most of the time, once he enters in, you're going to see him getting top hand position. It's a very common tactic for a lot of wrestlers. DC uses this a lot, this kind of top hand position defensively. You will see him use this a lot. His backhand will come up in case the guy tries to kick at him. You'll see him block kicks here a lot because guys don't feel like he stays on the outside until it's time not to. And so a lot of guys feel like their most successful time to strike is from the outside, so they will throw a lot of kicks from here, which he's ready to defend. But once he starts coming in, you're going to see more top hands. What he does mostly, though, the thing that you're going to watch out for the most, is as soon as he enters a range where he can put hands on you, whether it's for takedowns or striking, he is always actively striking. He never is not throwing punches from here. Either one of two things is going to happen. As he enters range, he continues to punch until either this guy, one, backs up, which is, of course, what he wants. He wants that guy to start moving backward on him. And then he's going to repeat the process. He's going to come in here, and then he's going to Trevor Wittman step, throw some punches until the guy backs up again. Or two, the guy starts throwing counter punches and starts trying to exchange with him, which is what a lot of guys are hoping. They want to bang with him, right? That's okay by him. He knows that that's going to happen. So what does he do? He waits for this trigger. He throws his punches, and as soon as they start throwing punches back, he's going to come underneath, and he's going to drive them back. It's the same tactic that guys like Stipe Miocic and John Jones use frequently, where they use that drive back. It's not even really a double leg. It's he gets underneath, and he just starts like propelling him like he's a locomotive, right? And he's going to push him back up against the cage, and that's what his objective is, to get him to the cage. And like I said, from the outside, it's actively feinting to keep them from coming too aggressively. He's going to Trevor Wittman step. He's going to throw bombs until they back off, or he can just start driving in. That is the majority of his striking game. Now, he will use a reactive shot on occasion, but mostly it's done because he's not getting what he wants. He's not getting the drive back. So instead of banging with this guy, he'd much rather be on the ground, where he knows his wrestling is far more dominant. We're going to talk about later on about what he does from the ground, particularly in the center of the octagon, to get them back to the cage. But for now, just know that his objective, if he cannot back them up, is he's going to do a reactive shot. From there, let's see. That's pretty much the majority of his game. One of the things I do want to mention is sometimes you will see him switch stance and start throwing jabs from the other side. I'm going to be honest. I don't think this helps his game. I don't think he should do it. There are particular reasons to switch stance, and usually I'm an advocate for it if you are an advanced striker and you have a particular game you're trying to set up. A good example of that is Israel Adesanya. Switching stance works really well for him. Wonder Boy, switching stance works well for him. They have clear objectives they're trying to do with the stance switch. It is a tactical thing. With Kamaru Usman, I think he feels like if he switches stance, guys aren't going to defend the jab very well. I don't think it really serves him that well. He might have a game plan above and beyond what I'm seeing, but from what I'm seeing, I don't think the stance switch really does that much for him. And I'm going to be honest, there's been a couple fights that he's used it, like the Colby Covington fight and some other fights where he's paid the price for switching stance. And he goes in here and he ends up getting tuned up a little bit, and he'd have been better off just staying where he was. You won't see this happen for very long. I think sometimes he just wants to do it so they don't get too comfortable, but overall, I don't think he's really getting a lot of benefit out of the stance switch. I think he's much better off when he stays and just sticks to his basic game plan. So that really basically covers the striking and takedown aspect to it. And then the next part, we're going to start talking about what he does off of the cage. Okay? Okay, so from here, I want to start talking about what he does once he gets him up the cage. A couple things I want to mention is that, first of all, there is not just up against the cage. There's several different positions from up against the cage, but there's three major ones, and then there's a bunch of sub ones that I could go into, but I'm not going to today. The three major positions that you're going to talk about is that person standing against the cage, that person with one or more hands on the ground, and then that person with a hip or a butt on the ground. All of these are up against the cage, and all are like very similar in the way that he approaches them, but they're all a little bit different as well. So I want to talk about his strategies from each of these three places. But mostly what I want to talk about is his overall objectives. There's a bunch of flowchart stuff I could get into as far as like, if they do this, he does this. If they do this, he does this. And I think that's true, but on the same note, I think there's some overall things that I think are more important. And when we talk about adding this stuff into your game, this is the stuff I kind of want you to focus on. So, first of all, let's start by talking about when you start talking about working off the cage from a standing position and what he likes to do from that. First of all, wrist control. If he is not fully connected, he's always going to have a wrist control. This both applies to as he's entering in and he backs him up, he might get a wrist control. Or if this guy starts to stand up and get away, you'll see him grab onto wrist so the guy cannot fully flee, and so that he has a connection point and he can start putting him up against the wall. Now, a couple of his major objectives from here. He likes to get a right hand underhook. You will always see him go for this. And the reason for that, I think, has to do with he just favors that side. Generally, when you start talking about offense, and this is something I want to kind of touch on anyway, because this is something that Trevor Wittman fighters do really, really well. Justin Gaethje's very good at it. Usman's very good at it. And these are guys who, offensively, have a very small number of attacks that they'll do, and they'll follow a very specific game plan and favor something as much as possible. But defensively, they're very broad. And this is a very common competition strategy where, like, instead of a very broad jiu-jitsu game, if you do a lot of competing, you might have one pass that you like to use instead of 4 or 5 different passes. And you might have everything designed around setting up for that pass. That's your game. And I think the right-hand underhook kind of works under that principle where he has a side he likes to go to. I think he's more than capable of switching sides and going to the other direction. I don't think there's a tactical advantage in it. I think it's just a preference. He likes getting his right hand underneath and driving them to the left. That is what he wants to do. So if he cannot achieve that, what he's going to do instead is this. If he does not get the right hand underhook and he gets an overhook instead, there's a couple things I want you to pay attention to. First of all, whenever he's standing, regardless of whether he has the underhook or not, you're going to see a lot of his head underneath his, but particularly in striking. When you talk about any type of a standing takedown and you have a body clinch, getting your head underneath is going to elongate them. And that's important when you start talking about single legs and stuff like that to get your hips lower. But against the wall, it's critical. And you're going to see him really actively working towards stretching him out and forcing this guy to stand up. It's going to lead to a lot of his takedowns, which we're going to talk about in a second. But from right here, number one is a lot of having his head underneath. It's also very frustrating and annoying for that guy to constantly have this going on. So from here, he engages in one of 4 different types of strikes. Shoulder attack, body hook, knee to the inside thigh, and foot stops. None of these are super damaging, okay? The body hook is probably the one that does the most damage, but even then, like when you watch him fight Jorge Masvidal, Masvidal's reaction is kind of like, just stop already. But what you need to realize is that from this position, while he's not doing a lot of damage, he's racking up a lot of points. So when you talk about an MMA strategy, this is designed to force this guy to react. he doesn't have to do anything other than continue what he's doing. He's quite content to sit here and do this the whole fight because he's winning, right? There's nothing that this guy needs to do something to move to escape this position, and that's what he's looking for. Is he's looking to generate a reaction so that he can then act. It's kind of the same as being on the bottom of side control and waiting for that guy to move so that you can do your escape, except in reverse. I'm going to get him up here, and I'm going to do these shoulder attacks. I'm going to get my head underneath. I'm going to body hook. I'm going to stomp. I'm going to knee to the inside thigh. And eventually, this guy has to do something, or he's going to get taken down. One of the things that he's going to do is in a scramble, he might try to create space. That's going to give him the underhook, and that's what he's really looking for. Once that occurs, man, it's open season. Like I said, this underhook, he wants the underhook to drive him down to his left because that is his preference. Also because he's designed his game around this. And so we're going to talk about a couple things that he's going to do to help him out with this. First thing I want to kind of point out is one of the things he will commonly do is reach across to the far side and grab a wrist and go 2-on-1 on this wrist. He really likes having total control of this far wrist. And there's a reason for it. As this guy starts to fall, what do most guys want to do? They want to put their hands down. So what does he want to do? He wants to preemptively remove one of those posts. Now instead of having 4 points of contact, I now have 3. And when he starts attacking his back leg, which we're going to talk about in a second, now you get a wobbly table, and that's what he wants. So he gets his underhook. He's going to start getting him extended out. If he can, he's going to go 2-on-1 on this back wrist. It's already easy for him because he already has the underhook. If he cannot do that, that's fine. He'll go to a body control instead. But generally from here, what he will try to do, especially whether he has the underhook, but especially if he has that wrist, he'll go into one of 3 different strategies, and it kind of depends on what this guy does. Really 4, I'm going to say. So if this guy is just kind of like here and his feet are kind of narrow and he's done a good job of elongating him out so the guy's feet are narrow, what you're going to see is he's going to pick him up and he's going to put him on the ground. He's going to do a double leg. He's just going to reach under, get a hold of these legs, lift him up, and drop him. That is his first tactic if the guy's feet are narrow. One of the common things that will happen, though, is guys will elongate their legs. And he's prepared for that. That's okay. But, like I said, because he's so active with having his head underneath, that first one presents itself the most. And that's what you're going to see him predominantly going towards. And so he kind of makes them defend that to fall into his second trap. The second trap, and I think this is probably one of his best attacks here, is as he's driving with this, instead of what a lot of guys do, well, they'll take this right foot and they'll hook a leg here and they'll kind of triangle it. This is a very common tactic that people like to use, but what he does instead is he almost gets more to the back where he comes around and he takes his left foot and he grapevines. So instead of coming here and triangling, he'll take his left foot, wrap it around like a back hook, and continue through to extend this leg out. And what he's trying to do is control this post and control the leg so that if I'm the fighter on top, I can't use this leg to post and I can't use this hand to post. So what am I now? I'm a wobbly table. And that's what he wants. That is his second tactic that he'll use to break guys down. And like I said, he likes going this direction. Sometimes with the underhook, he'll just knee pick and come this way, and sometimes that's enough for him to do this. The third thing that he'll do is if he cannot achieve either one of those, he starts going for a single leg on the far side. He'll start coming across and start hitting this. This is not his preferred. This is like number 3. Okay, I've had to go to this. The fourth one I want to talk about, it's not really his takedown to get there, but it's more controlling the position. And that's in the case of like Jorge Masvidal is a good example of this. He started framing out these hips, and from right here, he got his hands on the hips and he started getting his hips back. When this happens, what Usman does is as he feels this, he just leans his body in and he just throws his whole body forward with a wide base to get him backed up. He cannot allow him to start getting his hips back and creating space between the hips. So he starts by getting total torso control and then leaning in with his hips. And this is a very important tactic towards getting them down. So I think that pretty much covers the majority of his attacks from the standing position, but it kind of gives you an idea of like how he's got strategies, so no matter what this guy does, he's got something to do. And in the worst case situation, and this guy explodes and manages to get free, number one, that plays to his game, because remember, it's about pace control. This guy has to expend a lot of energy to not be in this position. In the meantime, he's racking up points, he's getting positional control, and he's frustrating the guy. And if the guy manages to get free, he's now burned off some of that energy Whereas Usman is still totally fresh. He feels great. So now the next time they engage in striking, he comes in more aggressively and does the same drive back. But he does it more aggressively, and it's harder. And each time he does this, it's harder and harder. Sorry, there's a truck. High video quality here. So each time this guy starts to do this, it gets increasingly difficult for him to defend that, and that's what he wants. So that's going to be the first part of the cage. Okay guys, the last couple parts of this are going to be pretty short. The first one I just want to talk about is if they get to this kneeling kind of position where they're either kneeling or both feet are down and he has one hand either side, or they have both hands, whatever. They have a hand on the ground and at least 1 or 2 feet on the ground. What he's going to do from there is essentially the same as what he did up until this point. He is going to get behind, he's going to grapevine, he's going to control the far wrist, and he's going to start breaking them down and turning them into the wall as much as possible. One of the things that's important is as this guy starts to get up, he's always looking to get his hips on top of this guy, get the grapevine and start controlling it here, doing whatever he needs to do. But predominantly he wants top hip position and he wants to control this leg of grapevine just like he did, and he's just removing posts. The whole time this guy is down, he's removing a post. He's going to get a grapevine, he's going to get a wrist control, he's going to start removing things. So whatever your strategy is for this, I want you to think about it in terms of that. I do like what he does with his using his left foot to grapevine instead of his right to get a hook. And he never wants to get, if you notice, he doesn't get hooks on the backside closer to the wall because he wants to drive them back in. So the left foot allows them, their hips to be going in this direction. If he gets this back hip, they're going to start doing this. And that's what he wants to avoid. He wants them always driven back into the wall. And that's going to kind of lead me into the last part, which is the ground. This is another very quick section. When he's on the ground, his goal, put him to the wall and start throwing bombs. A lot of times you'll see him end up in a closed guard, and what you'll see him do is this. He puts his hands like in a, he'll either put his hands in like a can opener, and you're like, why is this guy doing this? His feet are open. Why? Because he's using this to control the top of his body, the torso, and control his shoulders, keep the shoulders pinned to the ground, and then what he's going to do is he's going to walk his knees forward. And he's continuing to walk this guy back to the cage. So if he gets here into a closed guard, he's going to control the shoulders, and he's going to start to walk his knees forward with a real wide base so that this guy's guard cannot be closed. And what happens is the guy's feet are pushed open like this, and he's going to knee walk him back like so. Unfortunately, that's the best I can show without a partner. Same thing occurs from if he gets to a top half or something like that. Everything is about his hands. Whenever he does a top position, normally, you're going to put your hands to control the hips and stuff like that. In this case, he doesn't care if the guy hips back towards the wall. He can hip out as much as he wants. Even if he recovers guard, doesn't matter. So what he's going to do is he's going to get this crossface, and he's going to post a hand here on the inside hip and drive him back. You'll even see him in some cases cradle the guy or something like that. But everything is about maintaining control, not for potential risk of hipping out and recovering guard, not for the potential risk of this guy standing up. He doesn't care about that. He can get back to the top position. All he cares about is hands on this side and body on this side to scoot this guy back to the wall. And it works really well for him as a strategy. Once he gets the guy to the wall, this is where he's going to start throwing these hammer fists and the elbows and stuff like that. This is where in a closed guard, which you'll commonly see, his favorite attack to do, once he gets this guy back, he lets them recover guard. He doesn't care. He doesn't let them close their guard. But if they do, it doesn't matter because he'll throw elbows and stuff like that from there. But generally what you'll see him do is posture up, and once he gets to this posture, he starts throwing bombs from the closed guard with this guy pushed up against the wall. And this is what he wants. He wants the guy using the wall so that they cannot move out. By keeping their hips compressed and their head up against the wall, it forces them to be less capable with their movements. So when you start talking about risk of arm bars, you start talking about risk of triangles, things like that that are common threats from the guard, it immobilizes a lot of that because their body is getting folded up so that they cannot apply these things. They cannot get their hips involved and turn their hips because their head is scrunched up against the wall and their shoulders are pinned up against the wall. And that's what he wants. And he's going to drop bombs while he does it. So it forces them into this kind of nasty loop where like their best response then is to try to get to like a half guard and start getting their hips back to the wall and just try to start getting back up against the cage. But as they do so, they're falling into these traps that he had before where They're tripoding. Well, he's got a solution for that. He's going to grapevine, he's going to take the back, he's going to get higher hips, and he's going to break him down. And he's going to rinse, wash, and repeat this, and they have no solutions for it. And this is why Kamaru Usman is nearly unstoppable. Because guys do not know what to do against this stuff, and once he gets them into that cycle, it's almost impossible to beat. And a lot of it is the same stuff that Khabib used to do, where once he gets them up against the cage and he gets them down, they're kind of stuck, and they don't have a lot of good escapes, because the common escapes from the ground are very predictable when you're up against the cage. What do guys do? They get to here, they get their butt up against the ground, they start trying to maybe get an overhook, and they start trying to get a foot out, and they start walking back up, right? That type of stuff. And he has solutions for that. So this is why he's so dominant. But this makes up the majority of it. I hope you like this, guys. Maybe I'll try to do another breakdown on just wall techniques with a partner. I'd like to do that soon. It's just, unfortunately, I just don't have that right now. I just have to do it at my house. So hopefully I'll put that up soon. But in the meantime, I hope this made sense to you. I hope you liked it. I hope you gained something out of it. But the biggest thing is just, like I said, build your systems, man. Like, look at what these guys are doing to develop a system that plays to your strengths. But learn that wall stuff, man. It's super important. A vertical barrier makes a big difference in a fight. And if you have one, you need to have some tactics for what to do off of it, because it's very different from your standard wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Very, very different. And a lot of things that people assume work from there don't work as well. Now, if you want to build your game against going for the Uchimata or whatever, that's fine, you can. But this is what Kamaru Usman does, and what I like about it is it always puts him in a position where it drives the guy back in and they can never get out. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Like I said, smash the subscribe button, leave comments, all that fun stuff. Thanks.